Good evening and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5 deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is October 30th, 2015, Halloween. I won't be doing a Halloween show because probably everyone else is doing a Halloween show, but I will be doing something that some people might think is just as scary, or maybe even more scary, because it sort of flies in the face of what would be the accepted wisdom, which is maybe real or not, and it questions the nature of reality, and really that is what we must do as human beings every day of our lives, and learn what is real and what is not real. So I have a little bit about climate change. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about Barack Obama's new decision to continue troops in Afghanistan, and his decision just today or yesterday to bring to the public's attention the presence of special operation troops in Syria. Of course, they've already been there, but now he's just going public with it. And they will not be supporting the government of Assad, the legitimate government of Syria. And they are going to be the troops are going to have to decide which opposition group they're going to join and help. Well, I'm sure this decision has already been made, actually. And it'll probably be al-Nusra, which is basically al-Qaeda. So you're going to have U.S. troops openly helping al-Qaeda in Syria overthrow the legitimate government of Syria and installing the radical Islamic Caliphate. But that's all for American interests. And I can't think of anything more scary than that, because Russia is presently bombing Syria, and so I can see a scenario in which Russia bombs U.S. troops openly, maybe without even knowing who they are, and suddenly you have a situation in which the United States and Russia are actually oppositions on opposing teams in the battlefield. Is that World War III? Well, only time will tell. Well, let's go to a clip. This is from InfoWars with our old friend Alex Jones, telling it like it is once again, and then we'll make comments on it.
Across the northern hemisphere in 2013 and early 2014, we have seen record low temperatures, some of them the coldest temperatures ever recorded in the last 300 years since thermometers were invented. The Great Lakes entirely froze over. The Arctic and Antarctic, in their respective winters, saw record growth in the ice. But what does Al Gore and CNN and MSNBC and the UN and the BBC do? They show you weather satellites from the poles during the summers and show the ice shrinking, as it's always done for thousands of years with the northern and southern passages that were even documented in the time of the Vikings. They lie to people and say that penguins cannot swim in the Antarctic, and that in the Arctic, polar bears are dying, even though National Geographic has to admit polar bear numbers are up fivefold since the 1950s and are now invading areas not previously known to be in their range. But that doesn't matter. Obama said you could keep your doctor. Then he said he never said you could keep your doctor.
If you've got health care already, then you can keep your plan if you are satisfied with it.
If you like the plan you have, you can keep it.
I intend to keep this promise. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan.
If you like your plan and your doctor, you can keep them.
He said it wouldn't raise your premium, even though it did. So why not tell you that polar bears can't swim? Why not tell school kids they're all going to die if we don't pay Al Gore and the UN trillions of dollars in carbon taxes? Well, now because they're losing the debate, and it's been shown in the UN's own numbers that since the mid-90s, the Earth's temperature has actually dropped slightly, that there are natural cycles, they can't deal with those facts. So, all over, British and European news, but also here in the U.S., we've seen professors and others come out and call for the arrest of people that question anthropogenic or man-made global warming. And the latest is in the Times of London, with a straight face, one of the biggest papers in England, talks about ministers and the committee in Parliament calling for people to not be allowed, including members of government, to question the, quote, consensus that man-made global warming is not man-made. Well, there is no consensus. In fact, the facade of the consensus is collapsing. The consensus is forming that the only thing that's steady is change itself. If you want to see the article, the headline is "Crackdown Ordered on Climate Change Skeptics." That sounds like something out of the old Soviet Union. Then we segue into Al Gore and his new move to produce a Inconvenient Truth Part 2 with new lies for old. Bottom line, we have an authoritarian movement on the so-called left that is seeking to not just tax every form of human activity and track it, but to also silence anyone that would dare challenge it. These people are not liberals. They are out of control authoritarians. But I wanted to reach out to some of the mainline supporters of this who really mean well, and I want to discuss some of the real environmental threats to this planet. Open-air genetic engineering of plants for pharmacological crops, where viruses and bacteria are mixed into the genetic code of mainline staple food crops that then infect the entire family of, say, corn or canola, has been proven in major studies to cross the genetic line into animals and humans that eat it, damaging our DNA. We know that toxic waste dumping is a serious problem. We know that overfishing in many areas is a serious issue. We know that the development of superbugs because of the overuse of antibiotics is threatening not just human life, but much of animal life on this planet. But when you enter into the equation Earth changes and giant asteroids, a 2-mile across nickel asteroid would be estimated to be the equivalent of thousands of Hiroshimas or Nagasaki's. And that's something that humans don't have control over. That's something that paying a tax to Al Gore will not fix. Then you enter volcanic and seismic activity. Huge earthquakes from Chile to off the coast of Japan in the last few weeks, as well as California, as the Pacific Rim heats up. But government scientists tell us, don't worry, in the geological record, big events like this only happen every few 100,000 years, and we don't think we're due. They have no idea on the real geological line how often these events really happen. But what we know is many civilizations have been destroyed or damaged by them. We know the world is hit by huge earthquakes and tsunamis on a routine basis, causing tens of thousands to die every single year. But because these are threats that the government can't even pretend to control, they tell us it's no big deal, it's not an issue. I go back to this all the time. Honeybees kill more than 200 people a year in the U.S. alone, more than international terrorism combined. But we're not seeing Homeland Security checkpoints out on the road to stop honeybees because it's something that we know is just a risk in the environment inherently, just like earthquakes, just like tsunamis. What do you do to mitigate against earthquakes and tsunamis? You don't live in those zones, or you live in a home that is designed to mitigate the danger from living in those zones. The truth is, the greatest danger historically is government. In the 20th century, according to the University of Hawaii, 262 million innocents, non-military personnel, were killed by government, were executed, were murdered, in many cases raped and tortured before they were killed. Statistically, it's not earthquakes, it's not asteroids, it's not flesh-eating bacteria, it's not cigarettes, it's not firearms, it's not honeybees, it's not great white sharks that are the danger, that kill 5 people a year, but everybody's scared of them. No, ladies and gentlemen, it's government taken over by out-of-control criminal interest. And when governments start trying to say, we're not going to let you be pro-Second Amendment, or we're not going to let you promote your views on climate and the fact that the earth is always going through changes, we're going to shut you up. We're not going to let television have you on as guests. That's what they're proposing. you know you're dealing with the real threat that has reared its head throughout history. It's called despotism, it's called oppression, it's called tyranny. And across the world, it's on the march. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, to quote Sir Isaac Newton. And there is a response, a sleeping giant of free humanity that is awakening and beginning to move against the tyranny. The future, the destiny of civilization and freedom is in your hands. Alex Jones signing off for Infowars.com. Now back to David Knight and the worldwide radio transmission on this Friday edition. We'll be back this Sunday live as well with more live reports and special commentary.
All right, that's a pretty interesting clip, and I like the way he backs up what he has to say with articles from the mainstream media, a lot of them. Some of them are from InfoWars, but those InfoWars articles are pretty well resourced, research from mainstream media. Mainstream media does talk about the situation in Antarctica, and they are looking at the science that is the actual science that's being done, not the jazzed up so-called science that is being promulgated in the name of human caused global warming or climate change, but the real stuff. And you can actually look at the real stuff too, if you want, by simply typing in a Google search for satellite images of Greenland, for instance. And you'll see the actual images. There is a site online of day-to-day, hourly, virtually hourly, I believe, updates of Greenland by different satellites. Remember, the world is circled by many, many different satellites that are taking photographs all the time. Some of these are top secret military satellites that supposedly are powerful enough to record someone's, what the headlines someone is reading in a newspaper on the ground, or an ant even crossing the ground. I've been told by a former member of the U.S. Air Force that these top secret satellites have that kind of capability. We don't get to see those pictures, but you do get to see pictures of the ice on Greenland and the actual ice, the actual appearance of Greenland at the moment. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, comes out with a report once every 5 years, and they have created an artificial global warming scenario which is at odds with the actual facts. The actual facts record that the fluctuations, the seasonal fluctuations, are pretty much in line with what we've seen historically. We are not looking at a catastrophic rise in temperature on the planet. If we did see a catastrophic rise in temperature on the planet, we would be seeing huge melt-offs of the glaciers in Greenland, as well as other places. Greenland has an enormous amount of ice. It's a landlocked, I mean, it's an enormous island that is covered with, almost completely covered with glaciers. And what the IPCC and other government agencies, these folks who are trying to convince the population of the world that the ultimate catastrophe is just around the corner. I mean, those people have actually created artificial maps showing Greenland glaciers retreating far more than they retreat, even in summer. And we have to remember, of course, Al Gore, and Alex Jones referenced Al Gore. He is one of the primary spokesmen for anthropogenic global warming or climate change. And he actually predicted in 2007 that by 2015, the North Pole would be free of ice in the summer by 2015. And this has clearly not happened. You have lots of expeditions looking for these changes and reporting on these changes. And they're funded, the ones from America are funded by the U.S. Congress. There's something like $4 billion or $5 billion available for expeditions to look at climate change and global warming. And so, yeah, there's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be available if you and your people want to play along with the game and try to come up with evidence of global warming. And guess what? Hey, they find it. They find evidence. They exaggerate. They leave out things, elements that would mitigate the catastrophic nature of their findings. We see this over and over and over again. Here it is, 2015. The global warming alarmists have been screaming at us that the world is about to end since the 80s, the late 80s, when Jim Hansen of NASA first reported on the danger of global warming to Congress. And remember, before that, it was global cooling. There were books, there were documentaries, there were magazine articles, there were newspaper articles, there were speeches, on and on and on, all the way through during the 70s and into the 80s about the dangers of global cooling. The scientists were reporting that the Earth was cooling, and yes, we did go through a period in the late 70s of extreme cold. There was some of the coldest winters in the United States on record in the late 70s. People who lived through them remember how bad it was. And this, I'm sure, had something to do with stoking these fears that a new ice age was coming. When scientists look at the history of the world, they will tell you that we are in an interglacial period. In other words, the world has cooled as a result of solar cooling in the past, and it also has been a lot warmer in the past. We have to think about the glacial period, which has ended about 20,000 years ago. And yeah, it could come back. It will eventually come back, and huge glaciers will cover a very large proportion of the Earth's land. We have the evidence, we know it happened, and in the geologically recent past, much evidence of global civilizations have been destroyed. We think of civilization as rising up only since the glaciers retreated, and then civilization was able to develop. But there is evidence to show that there were advanced technologies and huge advanced civilizations with millions upon millions, if not billions of people on the planet in the glacial period, and probably even before the glacier, in the period between the glacial period before that. The human race is much older Well, I mean, even the paleontologists are willing to admit that humanity in the present form has been around for 1,000,000 years, 2,000,000 years, and they would say, well, you know, we're a lot smarter than we were then. Maybe we were, maybe we weren't. When you look at the ruins in Peru and Bolivia of that surround this lake called Lake Titicaca, it's called Tiwanaku. You can see, I should do a show on it. But these stones are scattered around on the shores of this lake, and there are buildings, there are temples, that are in a ruinous condition, but the stones are enormous, and they also have evidence of what can only be described as machining. They've been machined like with tools that would be very difficult, even with modern power tools, these to create the perfection and the exactness of these stones. And they were even made, there were stones made into like a giant version of some sort of building blocks that interlock and make buildings that are virtually earthquake proof. And these are just scattered around, and they're so perfect that they fit together. And according to the archaeologists, the mainstream archaeologists, the technology available to those people was very primitive. They didn't even have the wheel at that time, because we're talking thousands of years ago. And the age of Tiwanaku is debatable. Some people think minimum 15,000 years, maybe even more, and that is, you're talking the glacial period, 20,000 years, if you get that far back, in which glaciers would come and approach this area and depress the land, because there's an enormous dock around that sits on the shore, or fairly near the shore, of Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca used to be a lot bigger. An enormous dock, it's a whole complex of quays and inlets and all these stones that are broken up, but you can see what it was. For seagoing vessels, it had to have been as big as they are. The local natives have no way that they have even approaching the technology. These are primitive people, third world, indigenous people, who have boats made out of reeds that float on Lake Titicaca and do their fishing and so on. But it's fascinating to see the photographs, and it's something that will really make you think about what has happened in the past, what could happen in the future. We tend to think of our reality, our civilization, our lives as being a steady state, that no catastrophic change could happen. I mean, it's maybe not likely, but it could happen, and it has happened in the past, so there's no reason to think that it could not happen in the future. So, as each day goes by and new events unfold around the world, events which affect us personally, we see that civilizations rise and fall. The climate rises and falls. The heat emanating from the sun changes. It gets hotter, it gets cooler, and it's cyclical. In fact, the sun has a solar cycle, which is 11 years, And that's just one of its cycles. That's a short cycle, but there are bigger cycles. There are cycles within cycles within cycles. There are Earth cycles. You have polar shifts where the Earth, the magnetism, the inner magnet that really helps to prevent us all from being killed by solar radiation and the solar storms that would just destroy all life on the Earth. If it weren't for the magnetic field surrounding the Earth, and it does change, you could easily be inundated with this powerful radiation from the sun. The sun is a star, and it has an enormous effect on the Earth's surface. This is one aspect of climate change that the climate alarmists really never talk about. They don't like to have people think about the effect of the sun on the Earth, because it really makes us feel very small. And humans really are very small compared to these natural forces, like the Earth itself. Alex Jones mentioned the changes that volcanoes bring to the planet. I'm not sure if he mentioned this, but one volcanic eruption can actually cool the planet for a couple of years, because that smoke and ash goes way up in the stratosphere and then circulates around, and it acts as a cooling mechanism, because it causes the sun's rays to be reflected from the atmosphere back out into space rather than actually penetrating through the atmosphere and striking the surface of the Earth. So it's the nature of government that it wants to get more power. It wants to get bigger, because the people who are attracted to positions in which they are controlling other people are the kind of people who want to accrue power and expand power. They're not satisfied with just keeping the amount of power that they have. And it's sort of like a drug. The power is like a drug. Once you have a little power, you want more. And your greed kicks in, and you begin to have delusions of grandeur. Some people do. Oftentimes people do, who get power. They get power because they want power. People who love power seek power. And so they get a high from this. They get a sense of superiority from being in power. And so is it at all surprising that our government, our presidents, our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, the people in Congress, the senators, the Pentagon, the security people, the national security people are seeking more power. The police force, you see this from the smallest level, from the local police all the way up to international level with the UN. I'm not saying every individual, but as a group, they tend to want more, and they may actually have a benign purpose. If we could only get this power, then we could really help these people. But our hands are tied because of this or that law or the regulations, and these people are incompetent. They need us. We could do so much good if we just had the means. If we had more taxes, we could do it. We could change things. We could make a difference. People want to feel that they can make a difference. And it gives their life meaning. And this is a very natural human trait that you can make a change, you can make a dent, you can look back on your life and you can have a legacy and you can say, look what I accomplished. I did this, I did that. Whether it would be building a house or changing a law or changing people's behavior through the manipulation of reality, or your, let's say you're a filmmaker, you know, you want to make that film that gets people thinking and changes the direction of society, introduces a new element. There's so much good and creativity that comes out of that drive to make a difference, to have the power. But unfortunately, sociopaths are also attracted to power for the wrong reasons, because they have a personality disorder that drives them to be aggressively seeking control over others and then wrecking things because they're miserable and it gives them pleasure to see other people suffer. Maybe they have a little bit of sadistic tendencies thrown in there at the same time. So this is always a danger. Alex Jones in the clip referenced Mao Zedong and Hitler. And you know, both of them were very destructive in many ways to their own people. And this is an example of how a self-aggrandizing oligarch gets control and then runs with it, runs with that power, and is able to wreck his country. And we all have to remember that people like Hitler and Mao were actually supported. They were chosen, they were selected, they were chosen, they were funded, they were helped in innumerable ways by the powerful, the rich and powerful class, the small number of very wealthy people, the super rich at the very top, the industrialists, who felt that the world needed people in it with that kind of power. They didn't want to take it themselves, so they chose proxies to do that. Ruthless people who would not be afraid or timid when it came to getting the job done. And what a lot of that meant was be willing to kill their own people, be willing to go to war, to do whatever it takes, because these people, they were essentially, you know, mentally ill. This is why some people in this country distrust giving government too much power and feel that their only recourse is to attempt to prevent the concentration of power in the hands of a very, very tiny minority of people. Right now, the only people who are truly benefiting from the economic situation in this country are the top about 0.2%. This is a very small number of people. Across the board, from the numbers I've seen, from your very lowest class, from basically the people who are on government assistance, to your working class, to your lower middle class, to your middle class, to your upper middle class, to the wealthy, they are losing ground, they are saving less, they're making less money, so they're getting poorer, and only the small 0.2% are really thriving and doing well. And unfortunately, the numbers are the pundits who look at this, they tend to look at that very small group of people and say, well, look, they're doing very well, and so therefore that is going to help the rest of the people. And that is not necessarily so, unfortunately. Even if these small group of very wealthy people do want to help, it's really not feasible for them to be able to do that. So what we have to do is learn to handle our own finances and get the education to understand how the system works. This really is helpful. If you understand what money is, how it works, what the Federal Reserve is, what your taxes are actually used for, we can avoid some of those pitfalls. The way I see it is we go through life, we walk through life, and there's two ways to walk through life, with your eyes open or your eyes shut. Some people prefer to walk through their lives not really looking where they're going because they're not that interested. They just are looking at the present moment. They want to enjoy the day, enjoy their day. And they feel like, I just want to have fun in my life. I live for today. And I don't care about the future. And those people very often are prone to, essentially running up into an obstacle or falling into a hole. And that's because they're really not looking for where they're going. It's like you're driving down the road and you're not looking at where you're going. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are doing that by texting while they're driving, or maybe they're talking on the phone. The texting, I guess, is the worst. That could be very much a metaphor for your life itself, because you could look at your life as a highway. You're going down the highway. You're not looking where you're going, and so therefore you're putting yourself into a dangerous position where you may run into an obstacle, a catastrophic collision with an obstacle. And why? Because you're not paying attention to the future. Looking down the road is a metaphor for looking into the future and gauging the obstacle that's ahead, because you can see it down the road, and then veering away from the obstacle before you hit it. Pretty simple, pretty basic. But it also entails sifting through the information that you're getting, because now with technology we have a vast array of information, and some of it that's coming at us at all times, and some of it is contradictory, and some of it is deliberately contradictory. The mainstream media are masters at doing this. They will put up two pundits from opposing sides and then give them equal time with a moderator, and they're both making claims, and they're contradictory claims, and then they just say at the end of the interview or the contentious argument between the two, the moderator simply says, "Thank you both for your insights, and good night, listeners or viewers." On to a commercial break, on to the next show, and you're left knowing nothing. You really haven't learned anything, because you don't know who was telling the truth. And that is where the free flow of ideas and information that has been provided by the internet, that's where it comes in incredibly handy. And that's another reason why the internet must remain unregulated, uncensored, anonymous, so that people can have access to a vast array of information and viewpoints, far more than just two. Two isn't enough, or three, or four, but the consumer, the citizen of the United States needs to become, I wouldn't say maybe like Sherlock Holmes, but it needs to become a detective, needs to be like a lawyer who is, or a judge, or somebody who has a stake in finding the truth, getting to the truth. And like a police officer who is searching for clues to find out who is the perpetrator of a crime. And some clues are clearly erroneous. You know, these are false clues, false trails. Maybe they'll follow them for a little while and they come to a dead end. They realize there's no possible way. This is the way this particular crime could have been committed. So this person who is a possible suspect is now exonerated. And we're just going to not worry about them. It must be someone else who's behind this crime. And so this is what the average citizen needs to do, and it's a major responsibility. And it does take time. And it helps, I think, if people have a natural curiosity to be able to actually enjoy. It gives them the opportunity to look into the details and make those rational decisions and use their discriminatory intelligence and the logic. And you get better at it. The more you learn, the more you get a nose for what is real. After a while, false intelligence, you get a sense that there's something wrong here. You may not know exactly why it doesn't feel right, but somehow your subconscious is putting up a red flag. And so you're going, something's wrong. I know that this isn't right. I can't think of why, but your subconscious knows. You're just unable at that moment to access why. And maybe when you're lying in bed, you're trying to get asleep at night, or in the first thing in the morning when you wake up, and you're thinking about what you're going to do that day, or what you did the day before, or the dreams you had that night, you suddenly realize, okay, oh yeah, that's why. Suddenly it makes sense. Suddenly you're clear. Yeah. Now I see. Now I see the connection. And of course it's hard for us. We don't spend our whole lives figuring out ways to fool people, or figuring out ways to make people believe a certain way. There are people who study this. They study this. They go to college and they take classes in this, and they get degrees in marketing, in propaganda. That's what part of what marketing is. It's how to convince people to buy your product. And it may really be no more efficient than your rival or your competitor's product, but, so it's a challenge. You have to get them to buy yours, so it's a challenge. So you have to figure out a way. There's got to be a way. And what's the approach in which your message will stick in the mind of the consumer, so that they will think of your product and not your competitor's product? And this works the same way, or very similar, when you're looking at government trying to convince citizens that a particular way of thinking is the correct way of thinking, and this is the truth. And one way, of course, as Hitler and others postulated, or that was that you just make a bold statement, and it may be completely false, but you keep after it, and you don't get off base with it. You continue to repeat it, and you have multiple sources repeating the same statement over and over and over and over. And what this does is fools that logical thinking process, because you have the consumer, the citizen, who's a detective, and what he's looking for, and this is just natural human nature, is corroboration. Okay, you want to find out whether or not a certain statement is true. The world is getting warmer and humans are responsible. And that's really the message of Al Gore, Jim Hansen, the governments of many of the major countries on the planet. Now, right now we have Russia, and we have the president of Russia, Putin, who is flying in the face of the consensus about global warming. Putin has come out, and this is just today or yesterday, and said that global warming is not real, and in fact, it is being used by the West as a weapon to destabilize and destroy the economy of my country and other countries. He said, my scientists have studied this, and we have concluded that global warming is not happening, number one, and it's not man-made, whatever the changes are, that the minuscule changes in the climate, the global climate. If the humans are involved, it would be to an extremely small amount. Because that's quite one question that's really never addressed by even the global warming alarmists. Are humans responsible for 100% of climate change? Or 50%? Or 75%? Or 25%? Or 10%? Or 2%? They never say that. It's a vague statement that humans are responsible. And are we really actually to believe that humans are responsible for 75%, say, or 2/3 or 100% of climate change? What about the changes in the environment, the natural changes, the powerful forces that have a known effect on the climate? For instance, the sun cycles, volcanic activity. This is known, this is accepted, that these natural forces have a powerful effect on the environment. So Putin has it, and Russia, the Russian people and the scientists in Russia have as much at stake in living on planet Earth in the future as anyone else. And yet, he comes out and publicly refutes what is purported to be a consensus. And so what are we supposed to make of that? Is Putin just a contrary personality? I mean, he's just playing the devil's advocate for his own political purposes. Is he really that short-sighted? Or does he have something to say? Does he delight in tweaking his nose at the scientists of the West to aggrandize himself and increase the prestige of the burgeoning Soviet Empire not the Soviet Empire, but the Russian Empire, the post-Soviet Russian world? Is it about getting the attention and the confidence of the people of the world focused away from the United States and its allies and onto him? Well, it very well might be involved in that. And that may be his reasoning. But he may be right. He may very well be right. Because there's a lot of other evidence to suggest that he is right. And even if Putin is using it for his own purposes, how much more powerful for his own prestige and the prestige of his company and the confidence that people have in Putin and the sense of the high moral ground that Putin is trying to take, how much more powerful would it be for him to tell the truth than it would be for him to lie? Because if he has the truth on his side, even for selfish purposes, it nevertheless it's still the truth. And how easy for him to tell the truth if the West is trying to propagate what is essentially a lie. And why would the West do this? The West has an agenda. And Putin is very much aware of this agenda. The Chinese are. The leadership around the world are aware of this agenda. The Brits, the leadership, is aware of it. And it's a globalist agenda. It's an agenda in which the national sovereignty of countries will be reduced or eliminated. And eventually the goal being the entire world run by a very, very small group of men. And whoever will be the leader of that very small group of men, the chairman or the president or the speaker or the director, whatever you would call him, that man would be the virtual emperor of the world. He would be literally the most powerful man on the planet. Not like the President of the United States, who is purported to be the most powerful man on the planet, but the actual most powerful man on the planet, who would probably not be elected and not be interested at all in any form of government other than the absolute power of a monarch. Because remember, in the past, the aristocrats did have absolute power, as close to absolute power as you could get, and that was they reveled in that. I mean, they considered that it was their right. They began, I think, literally to believe that they were gods, but they felt like it. They were gods. They were treated like gods by their subjects. And anybody who has the power of life and death over all of their subjects could very easily start thinking of themselves as all-powerful. As long as they have the weaponry, in other words, and those who wield the weapons, and I'm talking about the military, as long as the military obeys the all-powerful ruler, then the all-powerful ruler remains all-powerful. But the key is the military. Because if the military loses faith in its leadership, in that ruler, and turns against him, then it's all over, because it all comes down to whether or not the ruler can enforce his policies with weapons. The threat of force is the only thing that will sustain the leadership of virtually any country. And there will always be people who are opposing. And that goes without saying. They oppose. There will be people who are contrary-wise opposed just because they don't like them for nothing else. They may feel shortchanged. They may want power themselves, absolute power. They may also have sociopaths in their ranks or in their leadership, and they want power, and they're ruthless, and they're fighting. They have two groups or more, 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups. This is what we see over and over around the world. It's probably happening in multiple countries. Syria, it's certainly happening. The rebel groups are fighting among themselves. Okay, I run out of time. Have a happy Halloween. Enjoy your weekend and sleep well.